Edgar Cayce on human origins. Edgar Cayce revealed volumes of psychic material, much of which was verified to be true to the amazement of doctors and scientists. Cayce discovered at a young age that he could go into hypnosis and travel to other realms to obtain psychic information on any subject. He claimed that anyone could do what he did with the proper training and attunement. He would go into a hypnotic trance that would induce a near-death experience. During his near-death experiences he was able to tap into a virtually unlimited amount of information which he referred to as the universal mind. He was able to reveal previously unknown information on a wide range of subjects such as astrology, the afterlife, religion, the future, consciousness, and human origins, just to name a few. The following information on human origins was revealed to Cayce during his excursions while out of the body and is told in Thomas Sugrew's book, There is a River. Because of the archaic language used in Cayce's description, I have paraphrased it slightly, without losing any of original meaning, to make it easier to read. People usually demand a beginning, so in the beginning there was a sea of spirit and it filled all of space. The spirit was static, content, and aware of itself. It was a giant resting on the bosom of its thought and contemplating what it is. Then the spirit moved into action. It withdrew into itself until all of space was empty. In the center, the restless mind of the spirit shone. This was the beginning of the individuality of the spirit. This was what the spirit discovered itself to be when it awakened. This spirit was God. God desired self-expression and desired companionship. Therefore, God projected the cosmos and souls. The cosmos was built with music, arithmetic, geometry, harmony, system, and balance. The building blocks were all of the same material, the life essence. It was the power of God that changed the length of its wave and the rate of its vibration which created the patterns for multitudes of forms. This action resulted in the law of diversity which supplied endless patterns. God played on this law of diversity as a pianist plays on a piano, producing melodies and arranging them in a symphony. Each design carried within it a plan for its evolution. This plan corresponds to the sound of a note struck on a piano. The sounds of several notes unite to make a chord. Chords in turn become phrases. Phrases become melodies. Melodies intermingle and move back and forth, across and between and around each other, to make a symphony. Then in the end, the music will stop and the physical universe will be no more. But between the beginning and the finish of the music there was glorious beauty and a glorious experience. The spiritual universe will continue. Everything assumed its design in various forms and their activity resulted in the law of attraction and repulsion. All forms would attract and repel each other in their evolutionary dance. All things are a part of God and an expression of God's thought. The mind of God was the force which propelled and perpetuated these thoughts. All minds, as thoughts of God, to everything God imagined. Everything that came into being is an aspect of the one mind. The souls of individuals were created for companionship with God, the whole. The pattern that God used to create souls was the pattern of God's own spirit. The spirit is life. From the spirit, the mind builds patterns. From the mind, the physical creation is the result. This is how the spirit, the mind, and individuality became the pattern for souls. This is how cause, action, and effect became the pattern for everything. First there was the spirit, the first cause. Then there was the action which withdrew spirit into itself. Then there was the resulting individuality of God. The spirit of the individual existed before their soul was created. The spirit keeps the knowledge of its identity with God. The soul has the ability to experience the activities of the mind in a manner separate from God. Thus, new individuals issued from God and remained dependent upon God. But individuals were also aware of an existence apart from God. Individuals were given the power to choose and direct their own activity. Without free will, it would only remain a part of the individuality of God. The mind, issuing as a force from God, would naturally fulfill God's thoughts, unless directed otherwise. The power to do this, to direct the force of mind individually from God, is free will. And the record or memory of this freedom is the soul. The soul began with its first expression of free will through the force of mind. The first thought that the spirit generated of free will, i.e., the first diversion of the force of mind from its normal path of unity with God, was the beginning of the soul. The nucleus of the soul was the balance of positive and negative forces that are equal in power. These forces produce harmonious activities. The positive initiating, impregnating, and thrusting forward. The negative receiving, nourishing, and ejecting. The steps of this evolutionary process are also the stages of the thought process: perception, reflection, and opinion. Thus, the soul consists of two states of consciousness. 1. The spirit which bears a knowledge of its identity with God, and 2. The soul which bears a knowledge of everything it experienced. The plan for the soul is a cycle of experience that is unlimited in scope and duration. Through this evolutionary cycle, the soul will come to know the creation in all its aspects at the discretion of the will. The cycle would be completed when the desire of the will was no longer different from the thought of God. The consciousness of the soul would then merge with its spiritual consciousness of its identity with God, and the soul will return to its source as the companion it was intended to be. As a companion, the soul would remain conscious of its separate individuality and would be aware of its own free will as it now acted as a part of God, but not diverting its mind because it was in agreement with God's influence on the mind of the soul. Until this state of at-one-ment was reached, the soul would not be a companion in a true sense of the word. The idea that returning to God means a loss of individuality is paradoxical, since God is aware of everything that happens and must therefore be aware of the consciousness of each individual. The return of the soul is the return of the image to that which imagined it. The consciousness of the individual, its soul record, could not be destroyed without destroying a part of God. When a soul returns to God, it becomes aware of itself not only as a part of God, but as a part of every other soul, and everything. What is lost is the ego, the desire to do other than the desire of God. When the soul returns to God, the ego is voluntarily relinquished. This is the symbology behind the crucifixion of Christ. The plan for the soul included experiencing of all creation, but it did not necessarily mean participating in all forms and substance. Nor did it mean that souls can interfere with the creation. Nor did it mean that souls are to spin their own little worlds, twisting and bending laws to make images of their dreams. But these things could happen. The soul was the greatest thing that God made because it has free will. Once free will was given, God did nothing to curb it. However it acted, it had to act within God's reality. By whatever route, the soul will return to God. The fact that the human body is a speck of dust on a small planet in a universe of galaxies can lead to the illusion that humans are a small creation. But the soul is the unlimited activity of the mind and the grandeur of imagination. At first there was little difference between the consciousness of the new individual, i.e., soul, and its consciousness of identity with God, i.e., spirit. Souls merely watched the flow of the mind, somewhat as people daydreaming, marveling at its power and versatility. Then souls began to act itself, imitating and paralleling what mind was doing. Gradually souls acquired experience, becoming a complementary rather than an imitative force. It helped to extend, modify, and regulate creation. Certain souls became aggressive with their own power and began to experiment with it. They mingled with the dust of the stars and the winds of the spheres, feeling them, and becoming part of them. One result of this was an imbalance between the positive and negative forces. To feel things demanded the negative force. To express through things, and directing and managing them, required the positive force. Another result of souls becoming aggressive with their own power was the gradual weakening of the link between the two states of consciousness, i.e., spirit and the soul. Some souls became more concerned with and aware of their own creations rather than God's. This resulted in the fall of certain souls to an even lower consciousness. The Bible allegorically refers to this event as the fall in the Garden of Eden and the revolt of the angels in the book of Revelation. This event is also the basis for the cosmology of Christian Gnosticism and Jewish mysticism. To enter into another level of creation and become part of it, the soul had to assume a new, or third consciousness, a physical form. Assuming a physical form is the way of experiencing that level of creation by means of a conscious mind, i.e., the third consciousness. Through the conscious mind, an individual can experience physical consciousness. The physical body, the five senses, the glandular and nervous systems. This transformation of consciousness does not apply everywhere at this level of creation. In other worlds and solar systems, the transformation may differ. One can only imagine the number of these other worlds and the aspects of divine mind which they represent.